All right. Well, hey guys, thank you very much for coming tonight again. It's really awesome to see a lot of interest on this topic, and that's one of the reasons here at Shockoe we try to come up with a way of creating some more awareness. What is virtual reality? What is augmented reality? What is mixed reality? And one ways that we decided with Dan here running the immersive media here at Shockoe was okay. So we need to figure out put Richmond in the map. How do we make that happen? And we found, of course, Dan said the association. There's a global association called the Virtual Reality Augmented Reality Association, which is basically creates that. It helps us create awareness, helps us make sure people understand what this technology is all about. At the same time, client and companies will have more interest in understanding what they can do with this technology. So tonight we're gonna do a couple things. We're gonna go through what the membership is. We're gonna encourage you guys to check it out, and hopefully you can register. There's really a lot of good benefits. We're gonna have our panel, and at the same time we're gonna talk more about the virtual reality experience. I think it's VRX conference that we went last week in California, which was amazing. Which is the awesome conference ever. So we're gonna do that, and then we're gonna kick it off. So.
Okay. Well, first off, let's say huge thank you to Shockoe for hosting, providing pizza, beer, all that kind of stuff. So thank you, Edwin, for that. Yes, I'm speaking into this microphone. No, it is not amplifying me. The reason I'm doing that is because we are actually streaming this event. So we're going to have that video provided after the fact. So if you guys want to check it out, if there's content you found useful and you wanted to kind of review, we'll have that available for you. So that's why I'm holding this, and that's why the panelists will be holding this, but you can check that out. As Edwin mentioned, Edwin is the president of the chapter. I'm the vice president, CEO of Shockoe. I work as the immersive media lead. So for any of you in the room who might be interested in what that means, we're going to talk a little bit about that tonight. But basically, we build enterprise applications. And so from my perspective, we use virtual reality and augmented reality as a tool to make work easier. So about the VR AR Association, they sent us some slides. There are a lot of words, and they're great words, but we only have an hour and a half. So we're going to kind of cut through some of this stuff and really get to the point about what the association is. So, for example, programs and initiatives designed to accelerate growth, knowledge, and connections. So why did we start this organization? Well, there's already a fantastic meetup group here called VRVA. I don't know if anyone here found out about this through that. Their founder, Rob Newton, is actually going to be speaking tonight. So there's already interest here in town. Why is the VRAR Association different? Well, it's a little more related to exposure, a little more academic in nature, a little more businessy in nature, and it's a really nice sister organization. So if you are an enthusiast all the way up to someone who is in the industry, you can go to the VRAR Association events, you can go to the VRVA events, and everyone here can promote this fantastic media, these new media. So key objectives: create opportunities for influencers, companies, and individuals, promote the use of VR and AR, foster education and research, assist members in growing their business, and create market awareness for vendor members and individuals. Industry initiatives and projects, industry committees creating best practices for different verticals. One of the things that we find very beneficial here, we actually sit on the enterprise committee, and we get to talk to and learn from some other amazing companies from San Francisco to Toronto to Dublin to Seattle. I mean, we've made some really great contacts through this industry, through this organization. So creating member value through promotion, knowledge, responsibility, all of that sort of thing. 3,900 companies are part of this organization right now. There's 50 plus chapters around the world, a lot of industry committees, 15,000 professionals as individuals. There are communities, so they actually have an agreement with Forbes. As members on the enterprise committee, we actually just worked on writing a white paper that's going to go through to Forbes. There's a Slack community, a lot of education opportunity, training online, on site, equipment rental, research and events, a lot of white papers and that sort of thing. You also get discounts to conferences. But it's not just for VR, it's not just for AR. As you can see here, there's actually a pretty even distribution, right? 1,500 VR companies, 1,600 AR companies, and then a lot of brands and retailers that are diving into both. these are just some of the committees that there are available. So depending on your industry, depending on how you're looking to network, depending on what you're looking to learn. I know there are a lot of folks here in, for example, the advertising industry. There's a committee for that. Enterprise committee. There's healthcare, automotive. I mean, arcade specifically, in addition to entertainment. So if you happen to be a game designer, there's a committee for that. So all that kind of stuff. Really good. This is a little rundown on the market. We're going to touch on this a little bit when we talk about the VRX conference, but some interesting stuff. Training program, as I mentioned, online on site. Equipment rental. University partner program, and I know there's some of you here from VCU, so I'm going to be talking to some of the professors at VCU, try to see if this is something that would be beneficial for the university. And this partnership program has to do with both research as well as training, free events, connections, networking, that sort of thing, as well as they're working on getting some internship programs going. So there's also a podcast. And I'm going to be completely honest, I have not listened to it yet, but I've heard fantastic things, so definitely check that out. And you can also participate if you are someone who's really big in the industry, and or if you're someone who's really getting your foot in the industry with a startup. Doesn't really matter. Other featured members and sponsors, you may have heard of some of them: Google, Samsung, the usual. But all the way down to a bunch of individuals, just individual game designers, startups, really great thinkers and enterprise or entrepreneurs. It's a really cool organization. So just in summary, there's a cool support team to help with your marketing events. There's programs and initiatives to help participate with. There's a huge directory, training program, university partner program, events. So unlimited attendee passes that are free for all VR AR Association chapter events. This event today was free. That's because everyone here is local. But in the future, we may want to fly in someone from a game design studio, or we may want to fly in someone from the advertising industry. And sometimes those events cost money. So it's still open to the public. We may have to charge, but if you are a member, just let us know, and we can get you in the door for free. Also, like when we went to the conference last week, we saved $300 combined just by being members to go to that conference, so that was pretty cool. Research, so a lot of access to research reports, publications, discounts on third-party research when available, promotion, marketing, equipment rentals, office, co-working spaces, that sort of thing. So hopefully you all see kind of why we're excited about this. There's also different levels. We can talk about this if you're interested in any of this. You can shoot us an email. Startup, company, academic institution, and corporate. There's also a student rate. I know there are a lot of students in the room. It is, if we get VCU to participate in the academic program, every student would have access to all the resources. But for those of you who might be, I don't know, Brand Center students, second-year Brand Center students, and you may not be at VCU much longer, there is a student rate that you may want to jump on. It's for a year. And there's also an individual that's not on here. There's an individual rate if one of you in the audience just wants to join on your own. Maybe you have aspirations, entrepreneurial aspirations, or you're a game designer, that sort of thing. And then, so VRX conference, 2017 review. Yes. Whew, okay. Sorry, we have so much to cover tonight, and it's very exciting. We're glad you're all here. Yeah. 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 Yeah, so that's a great question, Rob. For those watching streaming, what are the benefits of the committees? So I can only speak to the enterprise committee because that's the one I've been participating in. Bi-weekly conference calls, video conference calls with everyone in that space. A collection of research related to that given area. Welcome, you've made it. You are here. So yeah, Google is the best. Connections industry-wide, you have that face-to-face, and that can be everything from, hey, what are our goals? What are we working towards? How are we doing this? To what are you guys seeing in the industry right now? What's working, what's not? It can help your marketing, help your operations. For the enterprise committee, we did specifically a white paper on enterprise. There is, I should mention, a VR AR Association online conference in January. Has about 9,000 people already signed up for the link, so a lot of reach on there. As a member of the committee, we could participate and speak on that, for example. There's also a connection to, I mentioned the white paper that's going to be published in Forbes. That's through that committee. So that's generally that. The other thing is, if you're interested in promoting something and going in a direction, if there's enough interest, for example, I know David had mentioned starting a spatial audio committee, and we're going to talk about what spatial audio is and why it's important. Generate enough interest, get enough people, which it's out there, we can get a committee going, that sort of thing. So thanks, Rob. That's a great question. Any other questions on the committee before we go into the VRX overview? No? Or on the association, sorry. And then for the association, why did we start here in Richmond? Edwin spoke about kind of the excitement. I think the fact that all of you came out tonight is a huge testament to the fact that, this city of Richmond has got some cool things going for it, and we really wanted to promote that, and we really wanted to get that out there. So it's really exciting to have this opportunity here. So VRX 2017 review. First off, what is VRX? So this was a conference and expo that happened last week out in San Francisco. It's put on by a British company called VR Intelligence, and they advertise it as the world's leading senior level VR industry event. Participants that spoke and were there and on panels, a lot of the usual suspects, Intel, Oculus, HTC, but you also saw Qualcomm, you saw a lot of enterprise individuals from Ford, Audi, BMW, a lot of retail, Wayfair was there speaking. Who else, Edwin? Who else was there? It was a lot. So a lot of really great companies, and of course a lot of VR startups, VR tech specific. So very much they had two tracks, an entertainment track and an enterprise track. Based on what we do here at Shockoe, we sat through the enterprise track, so we're going to speak a bit to that. The first day was a mix of both, so we're gonna go through that. Aha. So many doors, I know. Huh? Here we go. Welcome. Yes. So, yeah. Also, I will apologize to everyone here. I understand we didn't send out instructions on how to get in, and I understand it was kind of confusing, so my apologies. Next time, if we host here, or if we host it somewhere else, we'll make sure to post good instructions. Right. Yeah. Just on behalf of Shockoe, welcome. We've only been in this space for about 2 months now, so we're excited to be here in Scott's edition. So industry outlooks, some statistics, and feel free to jump in on any of these, Edwin. 2018. This was one that stood out to me. This was VR software revenue is going to reach predicted right now to be $17 billion by 2020, surpassing hardware for the first time, and that's just VR. Right, so AR, when you consider in handset AR or in headset mixed reality, so for example HoloLens, Daiquiri, that sort of thing, this is a huge industry. One of the major themes early on in this conference was, hey, we have reason to recognize that things have slowed down because last year was so holy moly, this is getting huge, right? And yes, we have entered that trough of disillusionment where people say, whoa, hey, let's take a moment here. But that's okay, right? Because there's still $17 billion in software revenue projected to happen in the next 3 years, right? So VR headset price decreases have led to consumer adoption. PSVR is the leader. I think anyone in the room who's connected to the industry probably knows that. Actually, that's a good point. What industry are people in? Just by a show of hands. Let's do marketing and communications. I know there's a lot of folks here from that. A couple folks. Students at the Brand Center. There you go. Let's do technology. Okay, a lot of tech firms. Awesome. Let's do game design or just entertainment in general. Couple people. Okay. Enterprise. Anyone here from the enterprise side? Any major companies? Healthcare, maybe. Which industries? I'm just curious. All of them, okay? Oh, come on. Which industry are you from? Come on. And so, yeah, just wanted to get a feel for that. How many of you have University of Richmond? Awesome. Very cool. We're really glad to see everybody here. Has any, from a standpoint of exposure to this technology, has everyone here used a virtual reality headset by a show of hands? Okay. Has everyone here tried augmented reality, at least on their phone? Okay. A lot of stuff. Pokemon Go. Oh, yeah. When we say VR headset, how many of you have used one of the high-end experiences? So either an HTC Vive, Oculus Rift. Awesome. Cool. That's great. Well, we have 3 HTC Vives set up tonight. 3 of the panelists. David's going to be demonstrating some stuff, talking about spatial audio. Robbie's going to be showing off the game that he's got going to MagFest next month. And we're going to talk about some of the architecture work that we did here at Shockoe. So some really good stuff there if you want to check that out. But it's awesome to see so many people have tried the high-end experiences. But with that being said, as I'm sure many of you know, the high-end experiences are expensive. So one of the cool things is that headset adoption is increasing because of that price decrease. Slower ROI is to be expected. They had a really cool VC guy from Comcast speaking to what the outlook looks like. And they're still very bullish on virtual reality. They are investing in companies that are doing this, right? They are going out there and saying, hey, this technology is very viable and very real. And we're going to speak to some of those realities in a moment. There is a large need in enterprise for healthcare and education. This was interesting, I think, to us because we focus a lot here on enterprise. And so seeing that those were areas that had a huge opportunity, I mean, we knew that those areas had expected growth. We didn't realize just how much. The predictions are pretty vast. So it's going to be interesting to see how this stuff is used for those industries. And then the growth value in immersive is an enterprise overall. That was a big takeaway from the conference, that how businesses can use these technologies above and beyond simply entertainment. There's a huge growth opportunity there still, right? The entertainment thing everyone's pretty familiar with. So now there's that next growth model. Anything you want to add?
No, it's a lot of the. What's interesting as well was the use, like like Dan said, PlayStation VR. That was one of the huge eye openings for me because you can tell, Oculus or Vive or one of those will be there, but no, it was basically PlayStation because of the software, because of the content that they have, and the easy, you don't have to buy a computer in order to play with any game, so you can just use PlayStation. So that was another thing, and there, of course, what's coming was really cool, right? There was a guy there talking about encoding and compressing data. How do we make that data that is being created, the content being transmitted directly to the headset? And instead of being, all these cables behind your head, how do we make that not to be using a computer or carrying out what's it called, the HP backpacks? Right. So that was an interesting thing. He was able to reduce that into 99%. So the idea is to use 5G and use all of that video and the content being delivered directly from the cloud, from the server. And that was really cool. So when we get to that point, it's going to be another explosion in terms of this technology. So that was another thing that's happening. Qualcomm, that's another really cool headsets that they were talking about. I don't know if you want to mention more about that. Was an interesting.
Yeah, well, I think the interesting thing for me for Qualcomm is this guy from Qualcomm. Now, granted, he understands his audience, right? This is a conference on VR and AR. Goes in there, stands up there, and says, at Qualcomm, we believe that the future of mobile is in this technology, not in the mobile handset. And I think that's a pretty powerful statement, right? When you consider how the smartphone has drastically changed our lives in just 10 years. But then they showed how their chip this new chip that they're working with has all of this technology to really enable next level experiences, true 6DoF, internally tracked, spatially aware, all in your phone or all in a standalone headset. The standalone headsets are going to be huge, and they are coming soon, and they're going to have a lot of power. So that was pretty impressive. And the other thing that really stood out to me, so this first point here, mobile graphics right now, the guy who did that compression algorithm that Edwin mentioned, mobile graphics right now, we're at the point that PC cards were 10 years ago. That's how far behind mobile graphics are. And mobile graphics are pretty far ahead, but that's a 20-time lower quality than where we are at with something that's, if you look over there, right, and any of you who've used a Vive or an Oculus Rift understand the computing power that's needed. But imagine if you didn't need that. Imagine if that was living in a server farm somewhere and there are just tons of GPUs just cranking this out all the time, right? What that means is if we have the bandwidth, which is what the 5G is, and this compression algorithm, we can go to any device, and it's just limited by screen resolution. So that, I think, was what Edwin and I, when we saw this presentation, we looked at each other and we were just like, that's the future right there. It's going to be really impressive. So any questions about kind of some of these quick summary stuff? We're going to go a little bit more into some of the key takeaways, just broad trends that we saw, but any of this specifically? Yeah. Yeah. Yes, so latency is a huge problem, right? But the key there is, since it is, the compression algorithm is actually a video compression algorithm, all of the computational things are happening in that server farm, which means that if it's still computing at the high enough power, the frame rate issue isn't going to be, hopefully, that huge. And so if you have the bandwidth and the speed on a 5G network where all you're doing is 1% of that data, which I actually put a headset on with his algorithm, and you can't really see the difference. I mean, it's not there, which is pretty impressive that they were able to do this. And so, you know, I'm sure once it gets implemented, he was flying out to Verizon to test it on some of their 5G capabilities this past weekend. So we're going to keep following him and see where that lands. I'm sure there might be some latency issues to overcome. And I think, to me, the biggest issue to overcome first and foremost is infrastructure. Because getting that 4G deployment out there is probably going to take a little while. But once that happens, I think that we should hopefully see some inroads there. But great question. I think there was another hand. No? Okay. So a few other trends. Location-based VR. This was huge, 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 huge. And why this is cool is that we go to this conference and they're like, location-based VR, location-based VR. Well, there is one of the entrepreneurs in this very city, Richmond, Virginia, is standing right over there, who has a location-based VR company, and he's going to be speaking on this panel tonight. So I'm not going to talk much about that because we'll let Rob do that. Handheld AR. So this is a huge consumer focus right now. Wayfair. I mean, they came in and they said, they believe in this so much, they have dedicated and are in the process of, and have mostly already done, three-dimensional renderings of every one of their products. Something like 24,000 products, or 124,000. And on top of that, they released it as an API that anyone can access. So if you are, for example, someone in the room who does VR gaming or game design, and you want a sofa for a living room or a table or something like that to put in your experience, you can get this Wayfair API, pull it in, and the models are there for you. But really impressive stuff. I mean, and thinking about that idea, you know, I know Doug is going to speak a little bit to this when we talk about AR, but just how this can change perception for consumers. Blockchain-based virtual economies. It would not be a tech talk in 2017 without talking about blockchain. But this one was really cool. I really like this.
Second Life, you know, the kind of goofy guy walks in and say, we're going to launch our first cryptocurrency transaction. And he puts a headset and start, you know, talking to his team. It was a really cool and interesting experience. But the whole point for him was, you know, now we have Second Life. Now people pretty much doing a lot of money in that virtual world. How to actually make that a real money, or a real using blockchain, a really good cryptocurrency that they can use. Anyway, the whole presentation was a show, but at the end of the day, that was basically what he's trying to commit, like how you can use virtual reality to work and do your transactions and create these cryptocurrencies. So that was an interesting.
Yeah. Well. Yeah, and we can pull that video up to show everyone. And the other thing that was interesting is that not only do they create their own cryptocurrency, as Edwin mentioned, they're also using blockchain tech to account for the ledger system for content creation. So just like Second Life, you can go create content in VR in this community, in this world that you can sell. And the ID for that is actually held on a blockchain. And so it is completely decentralized and therefore protects the IP interest and copyright interest of creators, which I thought was really cool. And then also your identity is held on a blockchain. So your identity in this virtual world is one that is, again, decentralized and therefore not subject to the securities that happen when things are localized and that sort of thing. Social VR, this was huge. This was a huge thing. So this idea that in 10 years or 15 years, you can strap on a headset and see your grandmother halfway across the world and have a conversation with her and feel like you're sitting in the same room. There's a lot of power to social VR. I think we already knew this, right? Why is it that Facebook spent billions of dollars to buy Oculus? This is why. And everyone is getting behind it. And that includes for enterprise. This idea of having conversations with colleagues across the world where you feel like you're in the same room as them, there's a lot of power to that. AR, MR data visualization. This was really big for the enterprise. The general consensus was that the tech is not there yet, but it is coming and it is coming fast. And so what we mean by AR, MR data visualization is this idea of strapping on a headset. Let's say you work in a warehouse and you have a pick order sent to you that maybe uses machine learning and predictive algorithms. And you can see in front of you a bin, and you just look down with your headset. It's hands-free, so you don't have to worry about that. And it's just going to tell you what to pick, where to put it, right? All done through this mixed reality tech. Also, we saw, I think BMW was talking about, they do a lot of their design in both virtual and mixed reality, as does Ford and Audi. And what they're doing is they're actually sculpting and crafting cars, like essentially using white clay, and then they will put on these mixed reality headsets and see what would happen if they were to say, well, what if we change this to look like this exterior? What if we change this to have this type of component attached to it? It's really interesting stuff. VR training. Yes. Yes. So a lot of it exists currently in very kind of rudimentary form. So the social VR is a big thing right now. So that kind of blockchain-based economy and socialization platform that we mentioned, I have to look up the name because it escapes me at the moment, is one example. AltSpace is a really famous example. AltSpace is a good example because AltSpace was one of the first on the scene. And they didn't really know how to monetize it. They got a bunch of funding, really good early seed funding, that then went into some more VC funding, and then they didn't have any money, right? And so they had to close. And they were one of the first, this happened back in July or August. They were one of the first huge early VR casualties, right? Until 2 weeks later when they were bought by Microsoft. So there is potential for this tech, right? There's future for this tech. It's just a matter of understanding how it's going to be implemented, when those devices come down in price, all that kind of stuff. So I would say the answer to your question is how close? 2 to 5 years, we're going to see that a lot more. Yeah, absolutely. And for those listening on the stream, that was Rob Newton chiming in that we're going to see a lot of that mass adoption take place once devices can really come down in price. People have that adoption, then those social experiences will definitely kind of catapult and shoot through the roof. So VR training, this was a big one. We'll touch on this a little bit in the panel, but the idea that you can put an employee in a scenario and they don't actually have to be in that scenario. VR design, I think this is one we've known about for a while, but being able, Ford is one of the pioneers on this. We met a woman who we actually met with the woman who set this up 20 years ago. 20 years ago, she set up virtual reality design at Ford. So that's the other thing, right? Virtual reality is not new, it's just now accessible. But she was great to hear from. And then deployment at scale is just one of those kind of points that enterprise is starting to grapple with, is how do we actually deal with 10,000 VR headsets? So that's something we're seeing. And then VR for good. I wanted to end with this one because this was the last panel of the day, of the 2 days. And this is the one that stood with me the most because of this one example that blew my mind. There was a study out of Duke, and they had 8 people who were paralyzed from the waist down. They wanted to conduct a study to see if they could use essentially brain and spinal cord implants to make them control an exoskeleton as if they now had legs. So they figured out how to do this, and they put them in a VR simulation where they had this exoskeleton on in the VR simulation, and they were able to actually control the VR simulation and walk around in this VR simulation using just their thoughts. So then they translated this to an actual exoskeleton. They put these exoskeletons on, and suddenly these people who had lost all feeling below their waist were able to walk again using their own thoughts, using this tap into their spine and their nerves. That's not the most amazing thing. The most amazing thing about this was that right when the VR section ended, after that part of the study ended, all 8 of them reported feeling coming back to the lower half of their legs, or the lower half of their body. And most, I think it was half of them or 5 of them, are no longer classified as paraplegic. So really amazing things. There were a lot of other things about social documentaries, for example, that are very powerful and moving. A lot of really important things there. But that was just a really impactful thing where it's like, this technology is real, this technology is here, and this technology is making a big difference in the way that the world is going to work. And we're excited to bring that in. So that's what we saw from the RX conference. Any questions about that conference? There was a lot of entertainment stuff that, as I said, it was a separate track. So that might be reserved. They will release those slides. We might just have to share that in a future event. Any other questions? Yes? Yes. Yes, that was a big theme. Was how to engage haptically and sensorily and more natively. So obviously, voice was a big thing that we started to see come up. There was a lot of people creating kind of custom controllers and that sort of thing. But that is a thing, right? That is, how do we make it feel truly real? And that is something that we're working on. This was, I think, more of a software and business-minded symposium, so we didn't talk too much about input, but is there anything? Yep. Yeah, so, and that was cool because it goes above what Leap Motion can do. You know, one of my problems as a UX designer with Leap Motion is you can grab something and you see your hand and that's amazing, but when you grab something, there's nothing. And I actually prefer using the controllers because even then when I grab something, I feel that tactility. So to have those gloves, I think, is an example of a good next step. Any other questions? Yeah. We saw some video from drones, mostly in the entertainment side of things. Mostly, like a lot of advertising is using 360 video for like using drones to capture that footage. But by and large, at the conference itself, I don't think we saw much about that. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yep. My answer to that is twofold. One, I feel that a 3D television was a solution for a problem that didn't exist, right? People Right. Samsung wanted to sell monitors. There you go. And people weren't sitting at their home going, man, I just hate my home theater because I can't see this in 3D, right? And it's not truly 3D. It's not immersive in any way. It doesn't transport you in any way. It doesn't enable things that you couldn't do otherwise. Virtual and augmented reality allow you to do things that you could not do otherwise. So right now, I can't see what the couch I want to buy on Amazon looks like in my living room, except that as of a few weeks ago, I can, because I can pull out my phone and I can pull up the augmented reality part of the application and I can see what that couch would look like at scale with lighting in my living room, right? So that's a problem that we're actually providing solutions for. So that's my thought on that. But that being said, there was a good talk. One of the panelists brought up the fact that the issue with adoption, there were 9 different categories that people reported in a survey about why they don't want to have VR, and price was only one of them, right? That means that there were 7 other things that people felt were prohibiting them from buying a headset, from investing in this. Now again, that's VR, that's headset. I think you're going to see AR in the handset for consumers, from a consumer perspective, take off much more quickly because people already have them. But as we get into that, and I'm sure the panelists all are champing at the bit because they probably have some thoughts on that. So with that, why don't we can answer some more questions after the fact and through that networking. But I know Edwin wants to introduce the panel. So let's do that.
Yes. So thank you guys. Come on, let's join this panel. I'm gonna try to stay standing, if that's okay.
Yeah.
Oh, that's yours. See that? I have to stand now. All right, so we have a fantastic panel. Dan already introduced a couple of these guys. I'm just gonna kick off with one first question, and then let him introduce that way. So, guys, what do you think AR, VR, mixed reality, which at the end is XR, so compelling in your area? Why don't you start with you?
So I'm David Waltenbaugh. I am sort of coming into virtual reality, augmented reality from the audio side of things. It's interesting, I don't have a sort of educational background in audio. I don't have an educational background in technology or virtual reality. I actually got my degrees in economics. So for probably the past 10 years, 11 years, I've been working in investments. That's just kind of been, that's a day job. And that was it didn't take me a long time to realize that wasn't for me. It's been a great career. It served me really well, but there was a sort of a missing piece of gratification that wasn't there for me. So over the course of the 10 years, I pursued my interest in music. So I've been spent every opportunity that I could moonlighting at recording studios and recording bands and working on, audio for video games, and basically anything that I could do to kind of pursue music and audio. And then about 18 months ago, I discovered spatial audio for virtual reality. Have been really interested in sort of the physics behind it, and also just how great it can be for the experience. But it's interesting, what has me the most excited about virtual reality is not limited to or even necessarily related to the audio component, but it's actually the last slide that Dan showed on the sort of the topics there, and it's the VR for good component. The more that I was researching VR and what VR meant and the different applications, and I really started to hear about these stories about sort of the phenomenal problems that virtual reality is somehow able to solve by more or less sort of fooling people into rewiring their brain to work in ways that they otherwise wouldn't have been able to. And realizing all the applications for healthcare, and particularly, like a an issue for me that's just personally important is behavioral health, and reading about sort of the outcomes that virtual reality has been able to provide providers of behavioral health and mental health care, the ability to sort of shorten treatment times by a third, and like very real outcomes that are actually going to change people's lives for the better. It sounds a little bit, pie in the sky and a little bit Pollyanna, but there's enough research out there that it made me willing to kind of pursue this, and make this the thing for me. So that's sort of personally where I'm coming from.
Hi, my name's Robbie Cizek. I'm a developer by day, and I'm an amateur game developer by night. I am the author of a website called theundeaddev.com, which is a game tutorial website, game blog, progress, all of the above. What I really like about virtual reality is that right now it's kind of the wild west of development. When you start working on a website or something, there's certain key elements that everybody understands. You've got HTML elements such as text box, radio buttons, checkboxes, something like that. Something that when the user sees it, they know what to do with it. If you're in game development, you've got your first-person shooter controls, the WASD, and then the mouse. You've got certain understood, just across the board, that's just how these games work. When you move into virtual reality, that's no longer there. The ability to just say, hey, the user will know what to do with this is gone. You've got to try and figure that out. It's one of those areas where I need to suddenly figure out how this is going to work forward, how people are going to be able to pick up on this, and then pass the control schemes, how I tell a story, how I get the user to enjoy something. All of that is brand new, and it's really exciting. So that's what I like about it.
Hey everybody, it's funny holding a mic that doesn't actually work, but my name is Doug Nunn. I work over at Capital One as a design strategist or business designer. I'm also the founder and used to be host of Creative Morning, so I recognize a couple faces that have attended that. It's good to see you guys. For me, not really coming from a tech background, although the design work that we do is very closely tied to tech. What gets me excited, I'm the AR guy on the panel, I guess I'll say, to clarify that. For me, AR is a fundamental shift in the way that people interact with digital information. It's from the beginning of computers, we've interacted through a screen. And when the world around you starts to become the canvas of digital content, the change is pretty immense. A little more tactically, what gets me excited about it, compelled around it, is just the utility of it. I think about frontline workers. I think about field workers. I think about, it sort of bucks the trend of technology replacing jobs. I think AR technology makes people better, faster, more efficient, able to make the right choices more often at the jobs that they do. So other technologies like AI, Internet of Things, they get me excited, but I think that those are going to really kind of pour some jet fuel on augmented reality, which I think about as sort of the front end.
I don't know how to follow all that. So my name is Rob Newton. I am the owner of River City VR. I am also the founder of VRVA. We founded that meetup in April of 2015. Yeah. So I see Himanshu's back there somewhere too. He's a co-founder with me. During the day, I am right across the street from this guy, Cap. Oh, you're at Cap One. Mm-hmm. I'm at CarMax, and I'm the integration architect there, so I work in IT. What's exciting to me about VR, also AR, is large-scale warehouse track spaces. So being able to utilize something like that for training as well as for entertainment. That really excites me. It's kind of infected my head for the past 3 or so years. And every time I see a large open space, I imagine what it could be, and I'm just waiting for the tech to get there. So yeah, that's what excites me.
And obviously, I'm Dan. I work here at Shockoe as the immersive media lead. And since we work in enterprise in both VR and AR, What really excites me is I like when we can use these technologies to make someone's work easier, their life easier, right? We all work, we all have a job, but it doesn't have to be hard. It doesn't have to feel like work. And the way that these technologies are enabling enterprises to just streamline and simplify and make things more efficient, or even see things in a totally different way. It's very exciting to me. So I think there's a lot of potential there.
So just to continue from your question, right? So AR, and how do you guys see, especially you, Doug, Stack? You think people will walk around with the headsets on AR side? You know, there's a lot of iPads and iPhones, but there's the headset portion. So same as walking around with it, with the Google Glass was a thing before. Do you think that's going to happen with AR and the headsets?
So in a word, yes. I think specifically around AR and glasses, everybody knows, like, until it's aesthetically pleasing and fashionable, people aren't gonna walk around with it. So that has to happen. The form factor has to come down. There's really a race going on to see who can do that first, and a lot of big players are there, and so I have confidence it'll get there. For me, one of the things that I think is going to drive it is actually the use of the phone as an AR device, because we're going to start to become comfortable and sort of rely on the functionality that we get in an AR environment, looking through the phone, holding it up like this, doing things with it, looking through. Once we sort of adopt the fact that looking through something gives us this enhanced experience, we're going to get sick of doing this. And when it becomes lenses, I think people jump at it as long as it is an aesthetically pleasing. Google Glass was an experiment ahead of its time, I think. Has found a lot of traction on the enterprise, in factories and in those types of environments, but in a social setting, it's going to have to be something a little bit more attractive. And I think the use of the phone as a first device is going to be something that helps propel.
You are the in the
So speaking of malls, I'll specifically ask for a show of hands. So how many of you have finished all your, or at least done some Christmas shopping so far? Yeah, okay. How many of you did that online? How many of you have been in a mall in the past days? Okay, we've got maybe 10 of us or so. So one of the things that malls are struggling with right now, that a lot of brick and mortar are struggling with, Amazon effect, right? So that online shopping is taking them out of the brick and mortar stores. So malls are reaching out to location-based companies and saying, can you in our mall in some of this space that's not being used anymore, in the hopes that it will attract customers and feet traffic into the mall, that they may shop while they're there as well. So I think that that's going to have a positive effect. And I think VR arcades are one of the ones that are really popular for that right now, because they're very, very popular in that topic, right? Room, because it's really cool, right? And kids want to go play these really, but it's expensive. $3,000 that with a high-end gaming PC, high-end VR headset is a little too. So I think there's going to be a window of opportunity where VR arcades can take the same exact equipment that we see here, a room-scale VR setup like HTC Vive, and they can set up 10 stations and really make a business out of that. But over time, just like we saw with arcades in the 80s and the early 90s, we're going to see that diminish a bit as the prices of these headsets come down and adoption increases. So it's going to be companies like, I hope City VR, my company, will also be one that can start to differentiate and provide an experience that is large-scale experience that's beyond what can be possible in the home. And that's when I really think it'll start to attract traffic places where.
I'll add on to the mall theme there a little bit. First, I think there's a bunch of Sears available that they could go do that in. So that's a good option. One aspect of AR that people don't often think about, like it's a lot about what AR can add to your environment. There's another aspect about sort of like what can AR take out of the environment, get rid of some of the visual noise around you, some of the distraction, or help you find something that you're looking for. So related to malls and shopping, some would refer to me as like abnormally large, I guess. So I can't walk into a store and get a size 14 shoe tip. I can go look at all of them on the wall. I can think that these are great, and I ask them, and they're like, nope, we don't have a size 14. A potential future of AR is that I can walk into a store, and if that store is technologically set up to be able to do this, it can basically only show me the 2 shoes that they have in a size 14. I don't have to worry about whether or not, I like this one, don't have it. Like that one, don't have it. So you can think about sort of the implications around that and the way that people shop online, sort of, and there's opportunities for AR to impact foot traffic.
And just for anyone who's wondering, is Doug just painting this picture of something? Is this a reality? At the VRX conference, one of the heads of Skechers was actually talking about how they're doing exactly what Doug was just mentioning. So this is a real thing that is coming right now. I mean, we're not just spinning fairy tales up here.
I consulted.
Thank you. All right, so same thing, and staying with the same concept, right? So we have VR headsets, AR headsets, and mobile. While we have people playing games for, 30, 40 minutes, you can see there's some sort of a sickness going on. And initially, at the beginning of the VR thing started to happen, what's the problem with people getting sick? Rob, what do you think, as a developer, you can do to improve that or reduce that motion sickness?
Yeah, virtual reality sickness is a very real thing, and it's a very real thing that I've experienced firsthand. The minute I pulled out the Rift 2nd generation headset from the box and got sick 5 minutes into it. There are a lot of things that you do not do as a developer in virtual reality. There's also things you have to do. One of the things you have to do is you have to keep your frame rate up. If you've got a slow frame rate or if you've got latency, you're going to instill motion sickness in whoever's playing it. One of the things you don't do is you never turn your player or turn the person in the world. The person's reactions in the world need to be the person's own doing. If a person moves forward in the world, you have to make it blatantly clear to the person that they're either pushing something to warp someplace or they're pushing in a direction to move in that direction. But you can't really move the player. You want to do, there's a lot of stuff as a game developer we do, such as screen shake or playing with a field of vision or working on focusing on certain things. And these are all subtle clues that we as game developers have built over years to get the player to focus on this or get the player to realize they've been hit or get the player to, it's some way of interacting with the player to kind of subconsciously let them know that things have happened. All of that needs to be thrown out when you get into virtual reality because all of that will make the player instantly sick. So it's you can't do any of that stuff. You have to make sure the player is in control of themselves. If you're in a game where you have a player constantly moving, you have to make sure the player has a reference point that isn't. So games where you're piloting a mech or games where you're flying something or all of those have a cockpit. Player can focus on and see that while the outside world is moving or doing something, this cockpit isn't. There's something that to that player is stationary that player can feel is the world to them, that isn't moving and isn't suddenly gonna betray them. So you have to give the player a frame of reference. You don't move the player when the player isn't expecting it, and you don't pull all of the stuff we as game developers have been pulling forever to let the player know things, and you keep the frame rate really high.
So I would say it's good to understand kind of what's going on underneath that, as to why that happens. It's what's called vestibular disconnect. So when your inner ear feels something or doesn't feel something that your eyes see, your brain tells, your lizard brain gets told basically that there must be something that you've eaten that's caused you to have a disconnect. So you must be feeling sick. So this is why you have that reaction to want to throw up. This is the same thing that happens when you're on a plane, right? So you feel it, but you don't see it. So it's still a disconnect. So anything that you do that can induce that disconnect is going to induce that sickness feeling. So I'm sure you've probably all tried one of the headsets where you slide a phone in there and you put it on. But there's a big difference between that and like HTC Vive or one of the new Oculus, where you don't have positional tracking. So if you're looking at a 360 video or something, you try to look around something and you can't, or you're watching a roller coaster or something like that. If you don't have that frame of reference that Robbie was talking about, it can actually cause that disconnect to occur. Now there's tricks and hacks, and we kind of talked about that, where game developers can kind of play with ways to make to get around that.
So as Robbie was talking about that, I got kind of excited because I felt like it was a total layup for me for the spatial audio side of things. So one trick that you sort of that VR developers are able to use in virtual reality and avoid some of the motion sickness elements is spatial audio. Both in cinematic and in sort of interactive. In addition to a lot of the other things that you can do, one of the things that you can very clearly use as a cue to get someone to realize where they're supposed to be, whether it's a documentary and you want to make sure that the user is focusing on one particular thing. You can use oral cues to draw the user's attention to where they should be looking. The same thing with video games where where you have to be really careful to not sort of instantly snap somebody over to a new area where they have no frame of reference. Audio is sort of something that it's subtle, but it's remarkably unsubtle when you're in the experience. It's sort of amazing how even when you're being overloaded with visual information, we're used to processing visual and oral information at the same time. So that's actually a great application of spatial audio.
If you guys have questions, please go ahead and just let me know. We're going to continue. Go ahead. Yes. Yo, I'm ready. Oh.
Yeah. Yeah, great question. So the question from the audience was just sort of, where do you kind of see the value in AR? He doesn't naturally wear glasses. He wouldn't necessarily want to wear glasses, and sort of what is the intrinsic sort of like value that you can derive from it. So two things. One thing I mentioned to Dan early on, it's something I like say often to people, is things sort of, objects matter relative to other objects a lot of times. So an example is I'm renovating a house right now. This is sort of the Wayfair or IKEA. I need to put a new vanity in there. Now I could go in that bathroom and take a whole bunch of measurements, then go to a store and take a whole bunch of measurements, and then try to think if like the color scheme matched what I had back at the house that I'm not in anymore, that kind of thing. But with AR, what I could do is simply look through a screen and actually see in relative size whether or not that object is going to fit the space or not, if it's look right or not. So from a retail shopping aspect, there's certainly value there of bringing those two environments together. When I think about like glasses, I think a lot about the utility of it for, we'll use like a factory line example. If you're somebody there that's putting together some massive turbine for GE, and there's a million steps that you're trying to follow, and you need to make sure that the temperature on this thing is not getting too hot, and that the speed of this is moving at the proper speed, and that all of these different sort of things are happening, you're only able to keep a certain amount of information top of mind to be able to make sure that you're making the right call and things are happening efficiently. If you look at early studies of deploying sort of augmented reality solutions across some of these places, you're seeing increases of quality control scores of like 30 to 35%. And so by giving people sort of this extra layer of information in real time related to the exact thing that they're doing in that moment, it just kind of supercharges their ability to be efficient and to do the job that they're being tasked to do.
Kind of like Iron Man.
Yeah. And I think, to Doug's point, I think obviously here at Shockoe, we see that enterprise application of those glasses being very obvious, right, to us. It makes a lot of sense. But it's very easy to create a tool for a business when that's part of the job, right? You go in and you're like, well, yeah, I wear my headset just like you wear your hard hat, okay? But I think to the question of the consumer aspect, and Doug was mentioning, the interior decorating and design sort of thing. Another use case, for example, and this was something that was mentioned at the VRX conference by an ad agency. They were hired by a brand to actually make an AR experience that when you stand in Times Square and you look at every advertisement in Times Square, it is an advertisement for their brand through mixed reality. Well, what's really messed up about it is that I had pitched something similar when I was in grad school for advertising, and I was like, man, that's my idea. But there's no new ideas. But what's really interesting about it is think about how that content could be served up to you dynamically if you're wearing glasses, you're wearing contact lenses, and you're walking through life. And yes, advertising is frustrating, but advertising also enables us to do the things we like to do relatively cheaply or free, right? The internet is not free. The work we put into making things on the internet is not free. Advertising is really frustrating, but advertising can be better or worse. And when advertising is better, it's tailored, it's customized, it feels like it's for you. And so this is a way for you to, and I use advertising as one example, but imagine you're walking into a store, and imagine you're going to Vail to grab a beer, and they run out of beer it seems like every 2 minutes because they're selling out of all these different beers that they make, right? They don't have to update it. They don't have to change the signage because you can just look up and see whatever as it's updated in real time digitally. You don't have to, get out the thing to change up the sign. So the savings we have on print, now the environmental impact of not having to reprint things constantly over and over again, that sort of thing could be huge. And in addition to that, it brings up some complex legal questions, right? Like if we do that advertising thing, who owns the space in front of the advertisement? If someone's buying a physical advertisement and we're augmenting something in front of it, who owns that, right? Who owns the air above a building? So there's some gray areas there and some scary areas there. But I think there's also a lot of positive areas there, that tailored, customized experience that sort of thing would afford you.
Anybody else? Any other questions over there? Well, let's start with you.
Yes. Yes. Okay, so one keyword I left out is multi-user, right? So imagine a group of people that are doing this together. You go in with a bunch of your friends. You're wearing the PC that powers the VR would be on your back. So you wear a backpack. And you have controllers, so your hands are tracked and your head is tracked. We can even put trackers like on your ankles so you're tracked. So you can walk through that experience as a group. Or what I'm really interested in is kind of combining the concept of like laser tag meets VR, right? So you're doing team A versus team B kind of stuff. Collaborative is fun. Competitive is even more fun when you're talking about entertainment and stuff. There's a reason why laser tag, which was at like early 80s when that was invented, it's like the same technology today, and people still get $1 a minute at location-based places games because it's fun. Like you want to go do something with your friends, run around and have a great time and say you got the top score. I want to do that, but imagine instead of seeing a smoky room, some black lights, a couple of 2x4 and plywood like ramps, you know what I mean? Instead, there's There's F-16 jet flying overhead. There's a buddy out there in the lobby with an Xbox remote, and he's controlling that. And the rest of your team is in there, and you're talking to them and giving them orders, and they're taking cover behind this big foam car. And real life is just, but in VR, it's this broken down car, and there's flames coming out of it and stuff like that. So I really see like that kind of experience opens up location-based entertainment to go beyond what like done. And it also has this really added benefit in that that space doesn't have to be built and spend hundreds of thousands of dollars making it for one experience. I can have a video game developer like Robbie actually make that experience something completely different tomorrow. That same space can get more repeated customers. The location-based or a family entertainment center, that's music to their ears. They want to hear that they can keep customers coming in and keep them entertained using the exact same investment they made on day one.
So I can also think of a sort of a non-entertainment application, and that would be if you think about. I mean, it's related, but you think about military training or police force, where you have a team of 5 or 6 Marines who are going into a really, really critically dangerous situation. That without something that's completely immersive, it's really hard to train somebody. You can put somebody in the military in front of Counter-Strike or something like that, and there are things to be learned like that. But when you are able to control all the elements of the situation and do things that you otherwise couldn't do without them being incredibly dangerous, you're able to create training techniques that are potentially a whole lot more effective. So I know, for law enforcement, I know one of the things that both Busch Gardens, King's Dominion do, and in fact, King's Dominion just did this about 2 years, is they'll shut the park down and they will basically let local police, or in the case of King's Dominion, I think it was might have even been FBI, but they simulate active shooter or of bomb threat situations where they shut the entire park down and they have one active shooter out. That takes a lot of resources in a lot of different ways. And in addition to that, there's one King's Dominion and there's one Gardens. You can only change the variety of the so much. Whereas when you have something that's as large scale, maybe not as large scale as Busch, but something that you can change the environment and change the different things, it sort of allows you to just save a huge amount of much more applications for those types of training. Yeah.
So that's right. Oh, well, you want us to talk about it for the rest of the video? Oh, that's right. Okay. It's like a magic stick. You can only talk if I'm holding it. So one of the things that I'm thinking about as I continue to evolve this idea of large scale, I talk a lot about entertainment because that's really cool. I like that. It's really fun. But entertainment on evenings and weekends is really when you're going to see the majority of the traffic. But during the business hours of 9 to 5, that's when you can repurpose this talking about. I can make it a different entertainment experience. I can also make it a different experience, just like what you said for training. One of the things that that's really great about AR and VR is experiential training. So different than just watching a video, or different than just taking a quiz and answering some questions, when you actually experience something in VR, the way that you remember that is different than the way that you remember something that you were taught in lecture or in video or something like that. You remember it in the same way that you remember something that you did. The way that you remember that you drove here tonight, you remember doing it, not remember learning it, right? So that's a big thing for retention, for trainers that are out there talking about corporate training, or they're talking about military training or anything like that. Being able to experience something is going to increase retention quite a bit. Another thing that's going to help is being able to watch yourself do the thing you got trained to do from a third person. So imagine you're in this warehouse with let's say it's 10 police officers and there's a trainer and they're putting them through a scenario. They go through that scenario and then they actually play that scenario back, and they stand off to the side and watch themselves go through that scenario from a third person perspective. They can scrub through that experience in real time and actually see themselves do it. And they're seeing a full avatar themselves go through that experience. So those are things that I'm thinking a lot about in terms of building a capability so that a 20,000 square foot facility that may be entertainment in terms of marketing and getting revenue in the door can also have a mission for those off hours that's increasing education, increasing retention on training for military, for students, and corporate. Yeah, good call.
For those listening on the streaming, the question was in the social media realm, media marketing, how to capitalize on this new technology and get into that realm, and what kind of the prospects look like for that. Was that correct? Yeah. So first and foremost, I would say I think right now in the very immediate future, 360-degree video is probably the most prominent way that social media and marketing is using this stuff. Very, very high-end marketing, very, very expensive productions. You may have seen the Kentucky Fried Chicken chicken trainer video that came out for the HTC Vive maybe 3 months ago. That requires a game development studio and really intensive creation of 3D assets, that sort of thing. So for a more of an entrepreneurial bent, especially for small to medium-sized businesses, if you're marketing those, 360 video has a huge potential there. So that would be my first recommendation there, or thought on that. And then the second thought is thinking about how the hardware and software integrate, because right now they're so connected. I think often you'll see 360-degree video on social media and people look at it on their phone and they're not getting the full benefit of what that medium can impart, right? Because they may not have a headset, they may not think to do that. So what does your copy look like that you're using to promote that post, that video? How are you using branded content? Maybe you're sending out branded Google VR headsets, or maybe you're cross-promoting with Samsung, or the Google Daydream or something like that. So that to me is where that opportunity lies, is thinking of it as an ecosystem, thinking of that delivery channel and how you're actually looking at the entirety of the experience and not just the video, not just the audio, not just the message, but how it all works together.
Just something small to add to that with regards to social media. So I agree that 360 video right now for small businesses is really where most of what I'm seeing happening. Social media is a little bit behind. For example, as far as allowing sort of 360, sort of natural, native embedded 360 experiences in social media. Now, I know that Twitter recently has started allowing native 360 video posts, but only if you are sort of the KFC, or you have to have a reason, or you have to have options. I'm not able to just go, I put a 360. Instagram is, I'm a little bit more surprised about Instagram, because Instagram is owned by Facebook, and Facebook's making a push into 360 video. But for marketing purposes, those two platforms are a little bit behind, but I can only imagine that it's a matter of time, particularly because Twitter started to roll. I can only imagine it's a matter of time that is going to be native experience. And there's Snapchat, I guess. I'm a little bit older than the Snapchat thing, so I don't follow that as closely, but I'm sure they're right behind, or maybe.
There's a couple of spots where content creation is breaking into the VR AR space. A good example is poly.google.com, which is the Google's ability to show three-dimensional models in virtual reality. It's just a web service built up. You build your models with their free application blocks. You upload them the same way, and then anybody can then go in and interact with them. There's a lot of social-based VR apps out there right now. Everybody's trying to figure out how to interact with people in a way. Like you've got Vive's Home, where people kind of create their own little houses and stuff like that, and then they can invite people over to see what they're like. And Google or Facebook has something similar. As far as like real creation stuff, the next Instagram for virtual reality, I think the main thing preventing that right now is adoption rate. I think once that gets higher and more people have them, you'll see a lot more things made for people to create content for them.
You have 5 Bitcoins?
I can only really attest to what I see in game development right now. 'Cause it's kind of where I'm at. And in game development right now, that tends to be the virtual reality game development monetization seems to be the same as standard game development. So for purchase for the actual application, and then in-app purchases for things that they want to do from inside that world. As far as advertising and things, that might be a better question for.
I know there's some companies that are focusing on building those ad platforms for VR. They've gotten a lot of investment, but there's really not the place for them to go yet. I think I just saw the other day VR Chat's one of the other social platforms, like you mentioned, Space VR. Yeah. So VR Chat just got to 1,000 users at once. And that's a huge milestone for them. So you can imagine as an advertiser trying to advertise to a platform or to a space that like the biggest social space right now for VR just hit 1,000 people. That's not a huge market. So while there's companies building foundational things, I think they'll be leveraged in the future. I think it's just a little early, to be honest with you.
And another source of revenue that's a bit down the road is going to be integrating things in a way that feels very natural. So a story that I heard was a museum has actually created a VR experience. They recently expanded. You go up the elevator and there's a tip jar. And you can reach over with your Vive and put a tip in the jar. You're like, well, nothing happens. Oh, okay. So you go and you look around. Well, when you take the headset off, your web browser is up, and it has a way for you to donate immediately with PayPal. And you're like, oh, okay, well, that's one way to do that, right? So thinking through those ways of that monetization model, I think there's a lot of opportunity there.
And I would say that, I don't know if you this, but the AR, instead of just talking about VR, AR, there's definitely AR Kit, AR Core on the mobile devices are definitely bridging that time period between when we're going to probably see more adoption of people actually wearing devices on their heads more readily. I think you said basically they're going to get to the point where they're just tired of doing this, and there's so much value that they're getting out of that and world that eventually they're going to want to put it to their eyes. But in the meantime, quite a bit of for the devices like that you just hold it up.
Can you help? Great question. I would say, and not an expert necessarily in that exactly, but sort of the way that I think the system has to solve for it and not expect that you're going to train the person. And so the way that a lot of AR experiences work is that the cameras are going to spatially map, so they're going to actually understand the dimensions of the room itself, and that's how they're going to be able to sort of share objects with you that are relative in size to the proper dimension. They're going to understand how far back that depth is to the back wall, so that when they place the object in there, they're doing it in the proper. So ideally, you're not going to have to train the user. The system should be designed smart enough to recognize those things. Pretty darn close. If you look at a lot of the stuff that's out there on. Yep.
They know the intrinsic and extrinsic properties of that camera. They can know how to, what I see, de-distort that basically and do measure. So it's all on the system side, and it wouldn't be up to the, and that's only going to get better.
And the other thing I think there that deserves mention is where user experience design comes into that. Thinking about a year ago, I wrote about this idea of skeuomorphism 2.0. If you think about what's that? Yeah. So if you think about when 10 years ago the iPhone came on the scene and we were saying, well, what is it? How do we make a touchscreen seem normal to someone who's never used a touchscreen? Well, we say let's imitate life. Let's imitate actual objects. Now, 10 years later, we've learned how to use touchscreens. We don't do that anymore, right? We have flat design. But one, we need to go back to that. But two, we already do that, right? We were born in a 3D world. We only force ourselves to use 2 dimensions as we get older, right? So thinking about what that interaction is like, it's a lot more intuitive. It's a lot more natural. So then it becomes about onboarding in a way that says, hey, this is a new way to think of things, right? How is it that you can use what you already know to put it out there?
We invite you for the next event. Might be happening in the next couple months, maybe less than that. So thank you for coming. I hope you enjoyed the panel. Please give it to them. Yeah, please make sure you see what the guys put together so you can put the experience and maybe do something else. Thank you again. Let's see you next time. Thank you.